They had her locked in the sky, missiles ready, orders clear. But then, one voice came on the radio, and everything stopped. The drone of the C-130's 4 turboprops was a constant, bone-deep hum. A sound Dr. Eris Thorne had learned to compartmentalize. She sat on the hard nylon webbing of a troop seat, her small frame swallowed by the cavernous, dimly lit cargo hold. Across from her, a handful of airmen in flight suits were in the middle of a card game, their laughter sharp and loud over the engine's roar. One of them, a young man with a cocky smile and a name tag that read Gallo, glanced over at her. He leaned toward his buddy. "Think she's ever even seen the inside of a Herc before?" he said, his voice just loud enough to carry. His friend, Hicks, shrugged, not bothering to lower his own voice. "Doubt it. Look at her. Probably thinks this is first class." Eris kept her eyes on the worn cover of the book in her lap, a dense text on ancient linguistics. She didn't react. She was used to it. The dismissal, the casual underestimation. 42, with threads of silver in her dark, pulled-back hair, and a face more accustomed to archives than airfields. She knew she didn't fit their world. She was a civilian consultant, a specialist they were required to transport, nothing more. A piece of fragile cargo. The loadmaster, a burly master sergeant named Costello, walked past, his boots clanging on the metal deck. He stopped near the card game. "All right, knock it off," he grumbled, though without any real heat. He gave Aris a cursory glance. "You doing okay, ma'am?" "I'm fine, Sergeant. Thank you." Her voice was quiet, calm, almost too calm for the rattling. Unpressurized cabin. Costello grunted and continued his checks. Gallo caught her eye again, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought she couldn't hear him. Or maybe he just didn't care. Bet she's a professor of something useless. Ancient pottery. Or feminist poetry, he muttered to Hicks, who snickered in response. Eris turned a page. The words on it were familiar. A dead language she knew better than her own native tongue. She found comfort in its structure, its ancient, unyielding logic. It was a language of command, of kings and empires, a language no one had spoken for 1,000 years. An hour bled into another. The air grew colder as they gained altitude, the darkness outside the single small porthole deepening into an inky, starless void. They were over the ocean, a vast, empty expanse of black. Suddenly, a violent shudder ripped through the aircraft. The card game broke apart, cards scattering across the floor. The airmen grabbed for handholds as the C-130 lurched sickeningly to the left. A high-pitched metallic screech tore through the air, followed by a concussive bang that vibrated through Eris's teeth. "What the hell was that?" Gallo shouted, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw edge of fear. The lights in the cargo hold flickered, then died, plunging them into near-total darkness, relieved only by the faint red glow of emergency exit signs. "Engine 4 is out," Costello yelled, his voice tight with alarm as he braced himself against the fuselage. "Looks like an uncontained failure!" The plane dropped, a sickening, weightless plunge that pulled a strangled gasp from Hicks. Eris remained seated, her hands resting calmly on her book. She felt the shift in the aircraft's attitude, the subtle, desperate fight of the remaining 3 engines against the dead weight and drag of the 4th. From the cockpit, the pilot's voice crackled over the internal comms, strained and urgent, declaring, "An emergency. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Air Force Transport 79er Kilo Delta. We have an uncontained engine failure and rapid decompression. Losing altitude, I repeat, losing altitude." Costello was already moving, his professionalism kicking in. "Strap in, now, helmets on." The airmen scrambled to obey, fumbling in the dark for their gear. Eris watched them, her expression unreadable in the crimson gloom. The air was thinning, a cold, sharp bite in her lungs. She felt the familiar, light-headed tingle of hypoxia beginning to creep in. The loadmaster stumbled over to her, pulling an emergency oxygen mask from a panel above her head. "Ma'am, put this on," he ordered, his voice muffled. Eris took the mask, her movements deliberate, unhurried. She didn't put it on immediately. She was listening, not to the frantic shouts in the cargo hold, but to something else. A new sound, a different kind of roar, slicing through the night outside. Hicks pointed a trembling finger toward the small porthole window. "What is that? What's that light?" 2 brilliant, blindingly white lights had appeared, flanking them, one on each side, of the crippled transport. They were impossibly fast, impossibly close. Gallo pressed his face against the thick plexiglass. "They're fighters," he breathed, a note of awe in his voice. "F-16s, they're escorting us." A wave of relief washed through the small group. They weren't alone, but the relief was short-lived. The voice that came over the comms next wasn't the pilots. It was distorted, tinny, and broadcast across all channels, including the open comms in the cargo hold. An unknown voice, speaking with a chillingly calm foreign accent. "Transport 79er Kilo Delta, you are in restricted airspace. You will divert your course immediately to the coordinates we are transmitting. Acknowledge." The pilot's response was swift, professional, but laced with disbelief. "Unidentified station. We are a U.S. Air Force aircraft in distress. We have declared Mayday. We are unable to divert. We require immediate assistance." The calm, accented voice replied, its tone hardening. "This is your only warning. Divert course now, or you will be destroyed." A tense silence filled the cabin, broken only by the howling wind outside and the struggling groan of the remaining engines. The F-16s weren't an escort. They were an ultimatum. Costello stared at the comms panel as if he could will a different reality. "They can't be serious. We're a transport, a wounded bird." "They're serious," Gallo said, his face pale in the red light. "They're armed. I can see the missiles." The pilot came back on, his voice tight with desperation. "We can't maintain altitude much longer. We have to ditch. We have to try and put her down on the water." The foreign voice was back, cold as ice. "Negative. You will not ditch. You will divert. You have 60 seconds to comply." The countdown had begun, a death sentence delivered over the radio. In the cockpit, the pilots were trapped. Their training and procedures rendered useless against an enemy that held all the cards. They could try to run, try to dive, but the F-16s were sharks in their element, and the C-130 was bleeding. It was then that Aris moved. She stood up, her small book still clutched in one hand. She walked steadily across the swaying deck, her balance perfect despite the violent turbulence. She approached the stunned loadmaster. "Sergeant," she said, her voice cutting through the panic. It was still quiet, but now it held a new quality. A resonance. A command. Costello stared at her, his mind struggling to process her calm. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. Strap in." Aris didn't seem to hear him. She looked toward the cockpit door. "I need to speak to them." "Who? The pilots?" "No," Aris said, her gaze distant, focused on something none of them could see. "The Vipers." Gallo let out a choked, hysterical laugh. "The Vipers? Lady, those are F-16s. They're about to shoot us down. What are you going to do, read them poetry?" Aris turned her head slowly, and for the first time, her dark eyes met Gallo's. In the faint crimson glow, her gaze was like polished steel. The laughter died in his throat. The air around her seemed to change, to crackle with an unseen energy. "Sergeant," she repeated, her voice dropping lower, yet somehow carrying more weight than the roar of the dying engines. "Patch me through to their frequency." Costello just stared, dumbfounded. I can't do that, ma'am. That's a secure military channel." "Who are you?" Aris held his gaze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne," she said, as if the name itself should be enough. When it clearly wasn't, she added a simple, chillingly direct statement. "And that's my flight." The words hung in the air, heavier than the failing aircraft. "And that's my flight." Master Sergeant Costello stared at Aris, his mouth slightly agape. The absurdity of the claim battled with the unnerving certainty in her eyes. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're a civilian consultant. This is a restricted military." "Sergeant," Aris interrupted, her voice sharp now, slicing through his protest. "There is a satellite phone in the communications rack behind you, in the black case. Get it. You will call the number on the back of the device. It will connect you to the Air Force Command Center at Ramstein. Identify yourself, give them your flight number, and use the authentication code, Nightfall." Her delivery was flawless, a rapid-fire sequence of orders that left no room for argument. It wasn't a request, it was a directive from someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Costello, a man with 20 years of service, found himself moving before he had even consciously decided to. He turned, fumbled with the latch on the comms rack, and pulled out a heavy-duty black case. Gallo and Hicks watched wide-eyed from their seats. "What's happening?" Hicks whispered. "Who the hell is she?" Gallo didn't answer. He was still caught in the memory of her gaze, that moment when the quiet, mousy academic had looked at him, and he had felt for the first time in his life like prey. Eris turned her attention to the internal comms handset dangling near the loadmaster's station. She picked it up, her movements economical and precise. "Pilot, this is Dr. Thorne in the cargo hold. Can you hear me?" A strained voice came back from the cockpit. "Ma'am, this is not the time. We are trying to fly the plane." "I am aware," Eris replied, her tone infuriatingly level. "You are currently being painted by the fire control radar of 2 fully armed F-16s. In approximately 30 seconds, they are going to fire. Do you have a better solution?" The silence from the cockpit was her answer. "Patch my audio through to the hailing frequency being used by the intercepting aircraft," she commanded. "Now." I can't just—" "Yes, you can," Eris said. "And you will." There was a click, a burst of static. The pilot had complied. Out of options, out of time, he had yielded command of his own frequency to the strange woman in the back. Eris brought the handset to her lips. She didn't speak English. The words that came out were something else entirely. It was a language Gallo and Hicks had never heard, yet it sounded vaguely familiar, like the ghost of a dozen other tongues. It was guttural and flowing at the same time, filled with hard consonants and soft, sibilant hisses. It was the language from her book, the language of command. Outside, the F-16s maintained their deadly, predatory position. Inside the C-130, the airmen listened, mesmerized. The voice on their radio, the one that had delivered their death sentence, had fallen silent. Now, there was only Eris. She spoke for less than a minute, a short, clipped transmission. When she finished, she stood in silence, waiting. The handset held loosely at her side. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The crippled C-130 continued its slow, agonizing descent. The crew held their breath. Then a new voice crackled over the open channel. It was one of the F-16 pilots. He was speaking the same foreign language, but his tone was completely different from the cold commander who had threatened them before. It was laced with shock, disbelief, and something that sounded like profound, deferential respect. He spoke a short phrase. Eris listened, then raised the handset again. She replied with a single word. A word that, even in a language they didn't understand, sounded like an undeniable final command. And then, the impossible happened. Gallo, who was still plastered to the porthole, let out a strangled cry. They're breaking off. They're peeling away." He was right. The brilliant white lights of the 2 fighter jets banked sharply, their sleek fuselages glinting in the faint moonlight as they disengaged. Within seconds, they were just 2 fading stars, disappearing back into the blackness from which they had come. The cargo hold was silent, save for the groan of the engines and the whistling wind. The immediate threat was gone, vanished. Costello was on the sat phone now, his face a mask of bewilderment. "Yes, sir. Yes, I have the code. It's nightfall. Yes, I'll hold." He looked over at Eris, his eyes wide with 1,000 questions. Eris calmly placed the comms handset back in its cradle. She walked back to her seat on the nylon webbing, the deck still bucking beneath her feet. She sat down and picked up her book as if nothing had happened. The pilot's voice came over the comms again, shaking. "Cargo hold, Dr. Thorne. What just happened? Who are you?" Before she could answer, Costello interrupted, holding the sat phone out to her, his hand trembling. Slightly? "Ma'am, it's for you. He says it's urgent." Eris took the phone. "This is Thorne." She listened for a moment, her expression unchanging. "I see. And the asset?" She paused. "Unacceptable. That was not the agreement." Another pause. Longer this time. "Understood." Tell them I am invoking Protocol Zero. Costello, Gallo, and Hicks exchanged fearful glances. They didn't know what Protocol Zero was, but it sounded terrifyingly absolute. Aris continued, her voice hardening into something that could cut glass. The terms are no longer negotiable. You will have my location in 5 minutes. If the asset is not recovered and the responsible parties are not in custody by the time I land, you will not have to worry about our enemies. You will have to worry about me. Am I understood? She didn't wait for a reply. She ended the call and handed the phone back to the stunned Master Sergeant. The plane shuddered again, a reminder of their primary problem. They were still flying in a crippled transport, losing altitude over a cold, unforgiving ocean. They had escaped one threat, only to remain firmly in the grip of another. Hicks finally found his voice. We're still going down. Aris looked up from her book, her gaze sweeping over the frightened faces of the young airmen. For the first time, a hint of something other than pure composure touched her features. It wasn't pity. It was resolve. The pilot is correct about one thing, she said, her voice calm and clear over the drone of the engines. We cannot maintain this altitude. But he is wrong about our destination. She stood up once more, her small frame seeming to command the entire space. Sergeant Costello, contact the cockpit. Tell them to change course. Bearing 0905. Costello swallowed. Hard. Ma'am, begging your pardon, but what's at that bearing? My charts show nothing. It's just open water for another 300 miles. Aris looked toward the front of the aircraft, her focus absolute. Tell them, she said, her voice filled with a quiet, unshakable power, that we're going home. The command, "We're going home," echoed in the cavernous hold. To the crew of the C-130, it was the most nonsensical thing she could have said. Home was a base in Germany, thousands of miles away. Out here, there was nothing. Just the vast, indifferent blackness of the Atlantic. Costello hesitated, caught between the sheer impossibility of the order and the undeniable authority with which it was given. The woman had just spoken a dead language and made 2 hostile F-16s turn tail and run. His training screamed at him to trust his charts, his instruments, his pilot. But every instinct screamed at him to trust her. He keyed the comms. Cockpit. This is Costello. Dr. Thorne instructs, she says, to alter course. Bearing 0905. He braced for the pilot's incredulous, angry retort. But the reply from the flight deck was subdued, shaken. Loadmaster, we heard her. The charts are black, but tell her we're turning. The C-130 gave a great, groaning shudder as it began a slow, ponderous bank to the right. The remaining engines strained, protesting the change in direction. But they held. For now. The aircraft straightened out on its new, impossible heading. Aris remained standing, one hand braced against the fuselage, her eyes closed as if she were listening for something far beyond the range of human hearing. Gallo and Hicks stayed strapped in their seats, their earlier mockery forgotten, replaced by a silent, fearful reverence. They were no longer watching a useless academic. They were watching a force of nature they couldn't begin to comprehend. How long? Gallo whispered to no one in particular. How long can we fly like this? As if in answer, a new alarm began to blare from the cockpit. A shrill, intermittent beep that signaled catastrophic hydraulic failure. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, tight with controlled panic. We've lost primary hydraulics. Switching. To auxiliary? No response. I have no control surfaces. I repeat, I cannot control the aircraft. The C-130 began to wobble, its nose dipping precariously. The wings swayed, no longer held steady by the pilot's inputs. They were a multi-ton glider made of metal, and gravity was winning. This is it, Hicks breathed, squeezing his eyes shut. We're going in. No, Aris said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the rising panic like a surgeon's scalpel. We are not. She opened her eyes. They seemed impossibly dark, focused on the front of the aircraft. Just a little further. And then they all heard it. A new sound, distinct from the dying engines and the shrieking wind. It was a low, powerful thrumming, a vibration that didn't come from their own aircraft. It was coming from outside, from the darkness ahead of them. Costello fumbled for a pair of night vision goggles from a storage locker. He scrambled to the small porthole, his hands shaking as he raised them to his eyes. He stared out into the black, his body rigid. "My God," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't believe it." "What?" Gallo demanded, straining against his harness. "What do you see?" "Lights," Costello breathed. Not a ship, not an oil rig. It's a runway. There's a runway out here." Through the murky green of the night vision, he could see it. A strip of light, impossibly long, impossibly bright, materializing out of the empty ocean. It wasn't on land. It seemed to be floating on the water itself. A river of pure white. Light in the middle of nowhere, and the thrumming sound was growing louder. As the C-130 dipped lower, its controls useless, two vast, dark shapes rose from the water on either side of the phantom runway. They were colossal, sleek, and unlike any naval vessel Costello had ever seen. They pulsed with a soft, internal energy, and the powerful thrumming was emanating from them. The pilot's frantic voice filled the cabin. "I can't line us up. We have no flaps, no rudder. We're going to miss it." "You will not miss it," Eris stated simply. She still hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. As she spoke, a brilliant blue field of energy shimmered into existence between the two dark leviathans directly above the runway. It crackled, alive with power. The C-130, falling helplessly, flew directly into it. The moment they hit the field, the violent shaking stopped. The sickening lurch of the uncontrolled descent vanished. It felt as if they had been caught by a giant, gentle hand. The aircraft stabilized instantly, its wings level, its nose pulled up into a perfect glide slope. From the cockpit, the pilot gave a choked cry of disbelief as he felt his useless controls move under his hands, guided by an unseen force. The crippled transport settled toward the glowing runway with impossible grace. It touched down not with a crash, but with a soft hiss, its massive weight cushioned by the energy field. It slid along the lighted surface, slowing rapidly, until it came to a complete and silent stop in the middle of the empty ocean, cradled by technology that should not exist. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic, ragged breathing of the crew. The emergency lights of the C-130 flickered, casting long shadows in the sudden, profound silence. The cargo ramp at the rear of the plane began to lower with a low hydraulic hum. Not their hydraulics. Something else. Bright, clean light flooded the dim cargo hold, silhouetting a group of figures standing on the runway. They were tall, dressed in simple, dark uniforms, their faces calm and professional. Eris walked toward the ramp, her book held at her side. She paused at the edge, turning back to look at the crew. Her expression was serene, her composure absolute. Costello finally found his voice, a raw whisper of awe. "What is this place? Who are you?" Eris looked at them, at Costello's stunned respect, at Hicks's fearful wonder, and finally, at Gallo. The young airman who had mocked her, who had dismissed her as a useless academic, now stared at her as if she were a deity. He didn't look away. In his eyes, she saw the dawning, humbling realization of her worth. It was more potent than any apology. Eris gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She had seen what she needed to see. The lesson had been learned. Not through anger or revenge, but through quiet, undeniable power. She turned to face the light, her duty here complete. As she prepared to step off the ramp, she answered Costello's question, her voice carrying back to them with dignified grace, a final, closing whisper. "I am the librarian," she said, "and this is the archive.